There are certain games that spend years fighting a label. Sometimes it's a label they earned, sometimes it is a label that gets unfairly attached to them, and sometimes it's a label that becomes so dominant that it completely overshadows everything the game is trying to accomplish. For the better part of a decade, Code Vein has lived under one of the most stubborn labels in modern gaming. I'm part of the problem. I use it all the time. I use it quite often. The anime Dark Souls label. And to be fair, the comparison wasn't entirely undeserved. The original Code Vein arrived during a period where developers across the industry were trying to figure out how to build games within the framework From Software had popularized. That the checkpoints, the challenging bosses, the corpse runs, the deliberate combat, and all the familiar design philosophies that naturally invited comparison. The problem wasn't that those comparisons existed, the problem was they came before the entire conversation. Whenever people talked about Code Vein, they really talked about its world. They really talked about its characters. They really talked about the ideas that it was trying to put out there. They just talked about how closely it resembled Dark Souls. And honestly, the first game never really escaped that shadow. It was really good. Sometimes even amazing. I have a whole review here on the channel breaking down what I loved and what I didn't really love about the first game. The problem is with the series as a whole is it still feels like it's searching for its own identity. I think that's why Code Vein 2 surprised me, because this isn't a sequel that feels interested in refining the original formula. This is a sequel that feels determined to redefine what Code Vein itself actually is. And while not every experiment succeeds, the end result is one of the most ambitious action RPGs I think Bandai Namco has produced in years. When people first see footage of Code Vein 2, I imagine they're going to focus on one of the big things that I did. It's the scale. Because within the opening hours, it becomes immediately apparent that the game is operating on a completely different level than its predecessor. The original Code Vein it felt relatively contained. Larger areas existed, sure, but everything felt carefully segmented. Everything felt very level based. Code Vein 2 immediately abandons that approach, like it just drops it. Instead, you're given a motorcycle pointed toward an enormous landscape filled with ruined cities, abandoned highways, collapsed monuments, vast structures, and just like a desolate wilderness. And immediately, my reaction was probably the same most players are going to have. Is they're just going to go, oh, so they just made anime Elden Ring. And for a little while, that's exactly what it feels like. I can't lie. The checkpoints work the way you'd expect. The progression system initially feels very familiar. Death carries consequences. Enemies respawn when you rest. The structure seems obvious. But the longer I played, the more I realized the open world isn't actually the most important thing Code Vein is doing. It's just simply the first thing that you're going to notice. The real ambition for this game lies somewhere else entirely. One of the most difficult things for any post-apocalyptic setting to accomplish is convincing players that there was a world that existed before you arrived. And that sounds obvious. But it's surprisingly rare, to be fair, for a lot of these post-apocalyptic games. Many games create destruction. Few can create a world that has history. There's a very big difference there. Anybody can fill a city with rubble. Anybody can topple a skyscraper. Anybody can scatter abandoned vehicles across a highway. The harder challenge is creating a place that feels like it remembers what it used to be. And thankfully, Code Vein 2 understands this. The world itself isn't just destroyed, it's mournful. Every environment feels like it's carrying the weight of centuries with it. Massive towers stand broken against the distant horizons. Entire coastlines stretch into grey skies without a trace of life. The abandoned cities sit frozen in time, preserved like memories nobody wants to really revisit. What's impressed me the most is how little the game feels compelled to explain to you what's happened, what's going on. Modern games often struggle with that sort of restraint. The moment something interesting appears, a character starts talking about it. A codex entry appears, an audio log activates and starts playing. Somebody explains the mystery before you've even had time to really appreciate it. Code Vein 2 is surprisingly comfortable allowing the environments and everything going on around it to speak for themselves. The result is a world that constantly encourages your exploration. Not because there's markers on the map, but because you yourself as the player are curious. because you want to know what happened in this world. You want to know what happened here. You want to go out there. You want to get the answers. And curiosity remains one of the most powerful motivators in game design. The best open worlds don't reward players with loot. They reward players with a sense of discovery. And for the majority of my playthrough, I'm happy to say Code Vein understood this perfectly. Now, let's be honest. If somebody had described the plot of Code Vein 2 to me before I played it, I probably would have laughed because on paper, it sounds absolutely freaking absurd, honestly. You're a resurrected warrior. Your companion sacrifices half of her glowing heart to bring you back from death. The world is on the brink of collapse, and legendary heroes hold the key to its salvation. The solution involves traveling 100 years into the past. There are vampires, ancient powers, corrupted champions, multiple timelines, and I mean multiple timelines, apocalyptic prophecies. It sounds like everyone threw like every anime trope imaginable into a blender, and then Code Vein came out. Oh, yum, ready to go. It's cooked. But somehow, I can't believe I'm saying this, because I really cannot believe I'm about to say this. After sprouting everything I just did, I'm going to tell you guys, it works. I don't know how, but it works. It's not because the story is like particularly grounded. It's not because the lore is in any way easy to follow. I think it's because the writers made the surprisingly smart decision very early on to treat time travel as like an emotional device rather than a puzzle. One of my biggest frustrations with time travel stories is how often they become obsessed with mechanics, timelines, paradoxes, alternate realities, branching outcomes. That's what really takes away from my enjoyment of the multiverse saga in the MCU. Everyone's constantly trying to figure out how it works and explaining how it works, Eventually, the characters become secondary to the systems itself. And Code Vein 2 largely avoids that trap. The purpose of traveling into the past isn't to solve the mystery. It's more to build up the relationships. You spend hours alongside legendary heroes before history transforms them into the monsters you have to take down. You fight beside them, you learn about them, you understand them. You watch their struggles, you watch their triumphs. Then eventually you're forced to confront what they become. And that's where the narrative finds its emotional weight. Because these aren't just random bosses you're fighting. These aren't strangers. They're your friends. They're people you've spent time with. They're people you've grown attached to. Every confrontation you have carries history behind it now. And something many Souls-like struggle to achieve, I mean, bosses often have incredible lore, but lore isn't the same thing as an emotional investment. Code Vein 2 understands that difference, and the result is a story that remains engaging even when certain details become convoluted. Because at its core, it's never truly about the timelines. It's about the relationships and the people you meet along the way in those timelines. And I think nothing explains it better because none of this works without Lou. Lou is the best thing about this narrative. And thankfully, she's fantastic. What impressed me most wasn't her design or her role in the story. It's about how human she feels. Many games mistake mystery for depth, right? Characters become walking question marks. Every conversation exists solely to tease future revelations and future reveals. Lou avoids the trap. I mean, there are mysteries surrounding her, plenty of them, don't get me wrong, but mystery isn't her personality. She's allowed to be funny, she's allowed to be vulnerable, she's allowed to have moments of uncertainty. Most importantly, she's allowed to feel like a person rather than just another plot device. And that distinction really matters. Because by the time major narrative decisions arrive later in the game, you've already formed that attachment with her. The emotional investment is already there. The writers earn these moments rather than demanding them, and that's why they sort of land. Perhaps the boldest thing Code Vein does is abandon many of the systems fans would have expected to return, or make it feel similar. This would have been an easy sequel. Nobody would have complained if Bandai Namco simply copied the original structure and then expanded on it. More blood codes, more weapons, more bosses. Done. Package it up, ship it out. Instead, they chose a much harder path. Major progression systems have been redesigned, character building functions differently, equipment relationships have been rebuilt basically from the ground up. And while some returning players might initially resist the changes, I think in the long run, they are largely improvements because as opposed to the first game, the first game does encourage experimentation, but the improvements here demand experimentation. Experimentation is where the game becomes way more interesting as well. Because I think one of the biggest mistakes RPGs make is confusing complexity for depth. They are not the same thing. Anybody can add systems, anybody can create currencies, can create upgrade trees. The challenge is making those systems interact with each other in a meaningful way. Like when I first started unlocking Forme, jails, blood codes, boosters, bequeathed weaponry, and various other mechanics, I was worried the game was heading towards unnecessary complexity. Thankfully, that never happened. It never got there because almost every system that you interact with and unlock feeds directly into your combat. Nothing feels disconnected. Nothing feels like busy work. Every choice you make will affect how you fight, and every adjustment changes your capabilities in battle. It creates a level of flexibility as well that constantly rewards that experimentation. The game wants you to engage with its systems, and more importantly, I think it really gives you a reason to. Now, as much as I've enjoyed discussing the story, the world, combat remains the reason most people are going to fall in love with Code Vein 2. I can't lie. Thankfully, it's excellent. It's not revolutionary by any means. It's not genre defining, but it is constantly engaging. What impressed me most wasn't any individual mechanic. It's how they all interconnected and how everything feels. Every encounter becomes a resource management puzzle. You're balancing offensive pressure, defensive options, your mobility, the cooldowns, the I-core economy. All of this is happening simultaneously. It's a lot to take in. Success rarely comes from mastering just the one system. It comes from understanding how all the systems interconnect and work together. The design philosophy they have going elevates every fight. So especially the boss encounters, because bosses aren't simply testing reflexes, they're testing your understanding of the mechanics as a whole. The game constantly asks whether you've learnt how its systems interact. And when the answer is yes, combat can become incredibly satisfying. And there's no boss in this game that's going to be able to stand up to you. If I had to identify the mechanic that best represents Code Vein's 2 design philosophy, I think it would be the jail system. Not because it's flashy, because it is, it's very cool. It's because it encourages adaptation. So throughout my playthrough, my multiple playthroughs, I repeatedly encountered situations where my current build stopped working. It's probably the best way to explain it. Not because it was bad, but because the game had presented a new challenge, a different type of enemy, a different type of boss, a new problem, a new puzzle. And every time that happened, the solution wasn't grinding levels, it was experimentation. It's time to change up my abilities, change up my equipment, change up my strategy, which is something I feel the first game tried to do. But once you finally had that big meta build in the first game, you rarely needed to change it up. Fewer moments illustrate this better in this game, I think, than a particular boss encounter where I legitimately had to abandon my entire build, like replace my jail with a ranged alternative capable of generating I-core from a distance. So I was able to take this boss out from a distance because the build I had was just not working close quarters. The difference is immediate. You know, the fight transforms. It's a completely different fight. It's a completely different way of playing. The systems, they click. You know, I won, I win. Those moments happen constantly throughout the game. They're a huge part of what makes combat so rewarding. It's not finding a build that works. It's experimenting with multiple different builds so I can swap it up depending on the situation that's presented to me. I just find that really fun, if I'm being honest. It's just hella fun. For all the praise I have for Code Vein 2, there is one omission that is difficult to ignore. Co-op is gone. The companion system remains. It's actually quite good. Partners provide unique abilities, benefits, different combat styles, and interesting strategic options throughout the assimilation mechanics. But I still miss co-op. Not because the companions are bad, but because the original game proved both ideas could coexist together. The absence becomes especially noticeable given how much fun some boss fights would be with friends. It's not a deal breaker, but it is disappointing, and it's one of the few decisions that genuinely felt like a step backwards. Unfortunately, ambition doesn't always come without consequences. Code Vein 2 occasionally struggles under the weight of its own scale. Performance mode helps, quality mode looks excellent. It really does. It's a very pretty game. But neither completely eliminates frame rate inconsistencies. They're rarely severe enough to ruin encounters, but they are noticeable. And in a game built around timing and reactions, noticeable performance issues, they matter. Hopefully, future updates can help improve stability. I think some already have, because the underlying experience, it really does deserve it. What impresses me most about Code Vein 2 isn't the open world. It's not its combat. It definitely isn't the story. It's its confidence. Because this would have been an incredibly easy sequel to make. Bandai Namco could have delivered a larger version of the original game, and most fans, me included, we would have been satisfied. Instead, they took risks. They rebuilt systems. They expanded the scope dramatically. They introduced ambitious narrative concepts. They challenged us as players. They challenged our expectations. Now, not every decision works. Some systems are superior to others. Performance issues occasionally get in the way. The absence of co-op remains disappointing. But I'd rather play a sequel willing to take risks than one that's terrified of change. And I think in my mind, that's ultimately why Code Vein 2 succeeds to me. Not because it's perfect, not because it's the best Souls-like ever made, not because it dethrones From Software, but because for the first time in this series, I stopped thinking about what Code Vein was imitating. I stopped comparing it to Dark Souls. I stopped comparing it to Elden Ring. I stopped comparing it to anything, really. I was simply thinking about Code Vein. And honestly, I think, all things considered, that might be the highest compliment that I can give it. So I think if you're a big fan of Code Vein 1 or you're a big Souls-like fan, you should definitely play this game. It's an easy recommend from me. If I had to put like a number on it, I'm looking at like a 7 and 8. I think it's a really fun game. There are certain things that are going to hold it back, which is disappointing. But also means we may see a Code Vein 3. I think it's done enough in this sequel to carve out its own identity that totally justifies them continuing the series. It was a lot of fun. Character creation was fun. There are so many things that I really just didn't get to touch on, but they are amazing nonetheless. There's a lot of mechanics and there's a lot of stuff in here that is truly, truly well done. So definitely recommend the game. But that is going to do it for me, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. If you want to keep up to date with all my reviews, what I'm working on, or you'd like to suggest some, I have a Google spreadsheet in the comments down below, in the description. Go down there, recommend a game in the comments. We'll add it to the spreadsheet. I'll eventually get to it because, yeah, I think a big thing about, making this channel fun is reviewing the stuff that you guys want to see. So definitely let me know if there's a game you think I haven't played or I should play. Definitely let me know. But no, go out there, try Code Vein 2. Before you do that, go watch another video on the channel, like, subscribe, and all that fun stuff. And I'll catch you guys in the next video, all right? I hope you guys have a wonderful day wherever you are, and I will see you guys next time. Bye, everybody.